Okay, hey, this is Dr. Pete reaching out to you through the Athos Diet podcast. We have an incredible guest on the show today, Calvin Robinson from the UK. He is a political commentator, a journalist, a blogger, writer, and most importantly, a Christian, and sort of a rare breed of that to find in today's spiritual landscape and perhaps, cultural landscape as well. I had the pleasure of talking to Calvin for about an hour this morning, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I think we had a very genuine line of discussion. I think we explored a lot of great topics, and most importantly, I got to meet a fellow ally as we all try to navigate our way through this sometimes very confusing world. And it's nice to meet a person who sees the deeper meaning behind things, and at the same time can kind of relate those deeper themes in a palatable way. And so I had the pleasure of meeting Calvin, and I look forward to sharing our exchange and discussion with you now. Just to start out, I have to observe there were two things that caught my eye when I was watching a podcast that you had most recently with Michaela Peterson. And when I looked in the background, you have two icons in the back of your backdrop there. Tell me about the significance of those and how did you come about those?
Well, I've got St. George at the back, who is patron saint of this fair land. So I like to have him there. And I've got the Holy Family here. I don't know if you can quite see, but
yeah, I can see that perfectly.
Half and half. I think obviously the significance of them is obvious, but I like to have our fellow patron always watching over in the corner there if ever I need to pray for his intercessions.
Yeah, I mean, first thing I pull from that is that you appreciate the beauty of icons. There are many Protestant denominations in the United States that would think that artwork is comparable to an idol. I would argue that understanding is not the proper understanding, as they are icons. Sometimes I've heard this wonderful phrase, they're windows into heaven. What is your understanding of an icon?
Well, my understanding of them is that they're beautiful, and anything that's beautiful is supposed to direct our gaze toward God. That's the whole point of it. These are helpful for prayer. They help focus and direct our attention, and that cannot be a bad thing. We don't, obviously we don't worship these icons, but it's not idolatry. Some people don't even venerate them. Some people just use them for tools of prayer, and that's what
this tradition of iconography and veneration is so strong in the Orthodox Church that I found myself at a museum actually. And I venerated one of the icons, and of course, so one of the security officers came over and said, "No, you can't do that." But I have to say, I am one of those on the spectrum that tend to venerate the icons, and I also recognize they're not idols. It's not literal. Just like one might venerate a picture in your wallet of your parents or a loved one, the love, goes beyond the material and honors their memory and your connection of them. So Calvin, tell me this, and again, I just wanted to introduce myself briefly. I'm Dr. Pete Petitsis. If you can say petite and sus, you got it, Petitsis, and that's a Greek last name. I'm a doctor in emergency medicine here in central Pennsylvania, and I actually studied at Leeds University for like 4 or 5 months at one point in college, which was a great experience. And I actually practice medicine here, taking care of the sickest people in their most urgent moments, which can be a very religious experience, or a very spiritual experience rather. I came across your many interviews online and really felt like I was reaching out to an ally. That's the best word that I can describe it as. Can you tell me, Calvin, a little bit about your ethnic background and your professional background, and how you kind of came about the position that you have now to be such a wonderful spokesman for, I dare say, Christianity?
Oh, thank you. I don't know if that's the case, but my father's family moved over here during the Windrush period from Jamaica. So my grandparents are Jamaican on my paternal side. Very proud to be both Jamaican and British. The kind of people that would have, a china plate of Her Majesty the Queen on the mantelpiece, but also an icon of the ship, the Windrush ship that they came over on. So very, very tied to both places, which I can admire, especially in today's divisive age where everything is so binary and polarized. My mother's side of the family have, as far as I can tell, always been Northwestern European. I did one of those DNA tests. I am like 52 point something percent Northwestern European, just British Irish, just, they haven't gone anywhere. They've just always been here. Which is also fascinating. In fact, the DNA test was quite cool because I could see, so I knew that my father's family was from Jamaica, but I didn't know where prior to that, prior to the transatlantic slave trade, etc. And I found out that it seems that they're from Nigeria or somewhere around Northwest Africa, which is interesting as well, because obviously this week has been one of the topics of conversations as we record this podcast has been that the royal family are visiting Jamaica, and there's been protests about all the links to colonialism and all of the usual nonsense. But it's all this anti-white rhetoric, which I find fascinating because Nigeria is one of the places actually where the blacks were selling blacks long before the whites got there. So it may very well be the case that my ancestors sold me to the whites, or sold me to my family to Jamaica in some way. It might not have had anything to do with the Europeans, or it might have. I don't know. But I find that interesting too, because we always forget, or we misremember those parts of that. But in regards to how did I end up doing what I'm doing, I think it's just it's vocation. I was in technology. I was living a regular city life for a good while, and I enjoyed it. And then I wanted to shift into something more meaningful and more fulfilling. And I entered teaching, which was the start of my vocation. And throughout that period, I was discerning the priesthood, and right now I'm just about to finish in seminary, finish my formation and training here. And that's been a long journey. But throughout the process, I've been involved in politics in different ways, and political commentating in broadcast media and print media, and all of that has been centered around at least trying to affirm the truth, trying to affirm my Christian faith. I don't always get it right, but that's at least what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I reflect on what you say by remembering a phrase or a quote, something along the lines of, luck is 99% hard work, and 1%, luck. But I'm sort of a contrarian on that point. I've seen so many able, hardworking people do the 99% work and still not cross over the line into that one unique, rare spot. And I have to say, I think that's where this concept of destiny comes from, or those that are chosen rather than just called. And I wonder for you, Calvin, honestly, like you describe I'm certain there's a journey there of hard work, looking for opportunities strategically, et cetera. But then there's you who has taken this spot, and me being in medicine, I mean, I have to say there's so many politically correct, touchy, sensitive items in the emergency department, let alone in my hospital or my greater institution, that I feel truly very nervous about just being able to communicate freely, and I would not describe myself as someone who is a racist or discriminatory or has those leanings whatsoever, but there are certain keywords and a certain tone here in America that makes normal common sense discussion sometimes very difficult. And I'm very impressed by the position that you take. I watched your Christmas announcement, message, which was fantastic, by the way. And I'm just amazed that you were able to pull that off and get the viewership that you did, and still sort of stay protected still while saying all those things publicly. Anyway, what do you think about this concept of destiny, and how you've come about sort of reaching the position that you're in?
Oh, absolutely. I 100% believe in that. I think divine providence has a large part to play in all of our lives. We're all called to do something, and quite often we don't find what that calling is because it's a struggle. It's difficult to listen. It's difficult to hear. In regards to my own path, I've never really, I've never chased this. I've never tried to be a journalist or anything like that. In fact, I don't call myself a journalist. I've tried to listen. I've tried to look for the doors that have been opened to me, and I've tried to walk through those doors, because of course God can lead us to these things, but we have to take that step. We have to be active. And I often get people asking, how can I do what you do, or how can I become a broadcaster and commentator and this and that? Because people see, like, the moment you get a bit of profile, and to them it's like you've suddenly appeared, and so to them it's like they don't see all the years of hard work that have gone before it, and they want that instant effect. And I'm like, well, anyone can do this, absolutely, but my advice is always write. So I was writing for years, not to get to where I am, but because I felt I needed to. I wrote about, when I was a teacher, I wrote about the indoctrination that I saw in schools. Over lockdowns, I wrote about why we should keep schools open, and that's so important for young people who are going to fall through the cracks, and indeed have.
Yes.
And our government have realized that it was a mistake. I wrote about the issues I cared about just because that's an outlet that I had available to me. And I just did it so often that eventually outlets started reaching out to me to say, what's your opinion on this? What's your opinion on that? It wasn't that I was chasing these outlets. It was the other way around, because I'd established myself in those fields. And I think that's my advice to people: just write. Get your words out there, get your thoughts out there, let people know what you stand for, let people know what you believe in. And then if there is a space for you, it will be made available. But in regards to, the second part of what you've said about being able to say what you're able to say. So the Christmas special, and thank you for the kind words about that, by the way, because to me, that is the epitome of my calling or my vocation or my career so far. Being able to have an explicitly Christian television show, in the broadcast media, in the 21st century. To me, that's quite significant. That's quite important. It's just preaching the gospel. It's having interviews with people about what Christmas means to them, explaining the message of Christmas. If I never achieve anything else, I've done that. I've put Christmas out there to an audience that might not have received it otherwise. Because in this country, the BBC might have done something like that 60 years ago, but no way would they do that now. Right. Everyone's so ashamed or shy to talk about the faith of this land. In fact, they wouldn't even admit that it's the faith of this land anymore. But how do I get to that point? I suppose you have to move beyond fear of cancellation. Sometimes you have to get cancelled first. And just remember that there are more of us than there are them, so they can't cancel all of us. All of these platitudes are all easier said than done, but we just have to hold firm to the truth, because God always wins in the end. Well, God has won.
Yeah, it's interesting. First and foremost, I recognize what you're saying is sort of an authentic path. Your interest in pursuing these topics is very genuine and authentic, and I'm sure those that employ you, support you, work with you, sense that, and that cannot be faked or just simply a strategy, And then second, in regards to that message, that Christmas message, and those similar to it, it is fascinating to me that silent majority, how many people out there in a room just that really are appreciative of that Judeo-Christian message and just aren't in position, abilities, are able to articulate, perhaps, to defend it. I know in Scripture, Christ says he'll, if we're ashamed of him, he'll be ashamed of us. But at the same time, each person is given different gifts, and some of them are able to kind of fight social media and those kind of more eloquent and more clever, and others just can't. So it's good to have someone out there that is sort of taking on those battles, one at a time. So question for you, and I wanted to ask this question because I think there's a case for being a Christian. I think ultimately what we're after is the true, the beautiful, the good. And in my mind, Christianity sometimes is played as this idea that you're struggling, sacrificing for these 60, 70, 80 years, or in sad cases where I see an emergency department, maybe you're only around 30 years or 40 years, but let's say the average lifespan. and you're giving up a lot so you can eventually have a whole bunch of other things in the next life. But I really have come to disagree with that statement. I really believe that there's a return on investment right now, and that we live better lives as Christians overall. I mean, just in so many fundamental ways. How has being a Christian for you literally improved your life in the present?
Yeah, I don't think we're giving up anything. We're taking on the greatest gift we've ever been received, and that is Christ himself, God incarnate. I don't think, I think it's a very modern view, isn't it? Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's always been that view, that the things that society perceives to be good are not really good. They're just short-term, enjoyable, and they're vices, you know. I won't go into naming them because we can all imagine what they are, but those things aren't what make life. The things that make life, or what Christ taught us, Christ is the way, the truth. And I think he taught us that family is important. I think he taught us, well, after God, of course, that love is what it all comes down to. Love of God, love of ourselves, love of our neighbors. As long as we have that, we're going to live a relatively happy life. But happiness is subjective too, and that's a very modern concept, that we should be focusing on happiness. Of course, we shouldn't. We should be focusing on the things that Christ instituted, which are loving God, loving our neighbors, and loving ourselves. And as long as we do those, everyone around us will be living a better life. And that's what it is. But that's all it is. Christianity, you know, it's not about niceness. It's about goodness. It's about enabling the people around us to live the best possible life, or the goodest, is that a word? Goodest possible life, because we're good to them. And as long as we're good to people, they will feel the love of God through us.
You know, I think what's so awesome about the discussion of this idea that, you know, what's the goal now of Christianity, is that there really is a wonderful way through the mysteries of the church, you know, through marriage, through the liturgy, through many of these tools that we have within the confines of the church that give us encouragement through some of the difficult parts of life. And there's nothing more terrible than seeing people that don't have that inner peace during life's tough and very inevitable times. And again, you know, I've been at the deathbed, you know, many times at the bedside when someone is dying, and you know when family members in particular seem to be suffering beyond what's necessary, because they don't have this infrastructure, this spiritual infrastructure. One of the most strange experiences of my life was actually a gentleman who was dying of AIDS. He had been estranged by his family, and he basically had a good mental capacity, but his lungs were failing. And so he was intubated, but he was able to kind of express his wishes, and his wish was that we'd contact his family and that they'd be by his bedside after we basically extubated him and allowed him to die, you know, a natural way. I mean, this was you know, an intentional decision. So family was contacted. They showed up, and when they did show up, everyone had Starbucks coffee. Everyone wanted the TV to be on. There was no discussion, and it just seemed way too comfortable. You know, there was nothing spiritual about it. I understand that the idea was that they wanted a certain degree of civilized sort of comfort with the experience, but it became so comfortable that nothing meaningful was said. No one asked forgiveness. No one said goodbye. No one showed affection. They just sipped on their lattes and they watched The View. And it just seemed like not how I'd like to go, as opposed to, and I don't know if you've ever been to an Orthodox funeral before, but you know, it's very much based on ritual, and we reach the soul through the senses. And so there's incense, there's hymns, there's iconography, I mean, everywhere. You know, there's even oils and different wines and different things like that you participate in. And it's a very you know, I don't know if sensual is the right word, but there's, you know, we move through the senses to reach the soul. And I have to say, maybe I'm biased because I'm an Orthodox Christian, or Greek Orthodox Christian in particular. But to me, that seems like a much more beautiful way of connecting before the end. Have you ever been to an Orthodox church for architecture? I mean, I see icons in the back that certainly originate in the Byzantine tradition.
But first of all, I love that term. We move through the senses to reach the soul. I love that. I'm going to use that. I've been to some Orthodox churches. I find them very beautiful, and like I said earlier, I think beauty is something that directs our gaze toward God, and that's why I think in the modern age, many people are trying to destroy beauty and prevent us from perceiving beauty. But I do think the Eastern Orthodox tradition and the Greek Orthodox tradition is fantastic. There is a power in good liturgy, in that you can feel something going on even if you don't truly understand what's going on. But my ears pinged when you mentioned sacrifice earlier, because I think that, was it sacrifice?
Sacraments or the mysteries?
No. Suffering. Yes, suffering. You mentioned suffering and said that, you see people that are clearly coming to the end of their lives, and either they're suffering or their loved ones are suffering, and it might be because they don't have faith. To me, the key difference there is that having our faith doesn't stop us from suffering. We live in a fallen world, but we will always have suffering. The key difference is that we're never alone in our suffering, and Christ is always with us throughout that. And that is where the comfort comes. It doesn't take away the suffering, but God is with us in it and through it, and that makes the difference.
Maybe that is better articulated, because in a certain sense, going back to that story, it was almost as if the family was trying to avoid the suffering. And then in through the church, they embrace it, but sort of ease the experience in a certain way, and allow us to kind of face it for what it's worth. And I don't know if you ever lost a loved one. My mother died when she was 59 from breast cancer. But sorry. Thank you. That was a very difficult experience for me. But at the same time, I can't emphasize enough the power of that experience. Sort of in the context of the church and its tools to help me and my four other brothers navigate that. Have you ever experienced a miracle in your life? What would you describe as one that was really where you really felt connected? Like God's always around us, but maybe every once in a while he speaks to us, more directly than other times.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get to that, but I'll answer the previous question first. Is in that I've experienced loss of loved ones too, and my maternal grandparents, we were so close. We were such a small family, and they were like an additional set of parents, really. Yeah. We lost one a few years ago, and we lost one more recently, and that's been very tough. And I think about them every single day. I light a candle in chapel for them every single day, and I think, and I've got photographs of them on my side table here, so they're always close to me in spirit. But the faith gives me comfort in that when I'm lighting that candle, I'm saying a prayer for them, hoping that if purgatory is a thing, that they're sped through purgatory. If it's not a thing, that they are in heaven together, and whatever happens next in the afterlife, that they are united in God together. That's the most important, because they're so close. They are, my mama and my granddad were the epitome of family to me. They married quite young. They were married over 60 years. You don't see that very often these days. And everything they did was centered around the family. Their kids and their grandkids were their lives, and they would give anything for us. And they made us very happy. They gave us a great childhood, and took us on holidays with or without our parents and stuff. They were always there for us. And to me, they are what Christianity is all about. So having my faith, knowing that they are still living in Christ, whether that's now or at some time in the future, the theology of it doesn't really matter to me. Just knowing that I can pray for them, and that I still have that connection, and that connection will never be lost. At some point, I will hopefully be reunited with them. That is worth everything. But to get to the second part of your question, which remind me again, sorry.
Well, basically, I'm trying to understand how Christianity has sort of made a difference in your present life.
Oh yeah, sorry, you asked about miracles, didn't you? So the reason that I am a Christian is because, without all the backstory and my child and all that, without all that, when I found Christ was in the Eucharist. Because I'd always believed in God. I've always had a relationship with God. I've always prayed and stuff, but I don't think I was truly a Christian. I was probably a deist or something, you know, very loose.
Mhm.
But the moment I found Christ was in the Eucharist. When I'd been looking for him without knowing what I was looking for. I'd been to different churches and nothing had connected with me, but I wanted something to. I didn't know what it was. And I found a church that was relatively middle of the road, to be honest, about halfway up the candle. It was, you know, they didn't have incense, but they did have eastward facing altar. They did have vestments. It's difficult with the Church of England is so broad that, you know, it's
Sure.
I would say it's Anglo-Catholic, but other people say no, that's far too low church. So yeah, it fell somewhere at Via Media. Anyway, the whole of the Eucharist, the whole of that Mass meant something. I felt something. I felt the presence of the Holy Spirit without being able to articulate that. And I could see, obviously I couldn't receive because I hadn't been confirmed at that point, but I could see something happening to people too. And I wanted a part of that. I wanted to experience Christ myself. And that's when I signed up for confirmation classes and the catechism process and all of that. And I learned what was going on in the Eucharist, but I could see it, I could sense it, I could feel it before I could articulate it. So I would say that's, I don't know if that's a miracle, but that was a good connection. That was a good feeling of Christ on my heart. But there have been other things that throughout my life that I would probably describe as miracles that, to be honest, I'm not actually that comfortable talking about because it is a bit, it can be a bit intimate. But I think God is out there. God is acting in many ways. And one thing that I've said to people before is that I don't believe in coincidence, and I think that coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous in our lives. And it links back to what we were saying about divine providence and or destiny earlier. You know, we all have a calling, and God acts in our lives to help us try to see that calling. We just have to listen to it. We just have to take on board the silence, because that's where we find God, and try and perceive what he's telling us, and because he's always there and he's always helping us, he's always performing miracles in our lives. We just have to be open to seeing them.
Well, another thing too, again, I just feel like emergency medicine and being in the hospital system is such a sober experience and really tells you so much about life, because it's so true, it's so genuine. You know, people truly are themselves, which is sometimes not always the most welcoming. You know, when you're in pain, when you're suffering, when things seem dismal, that you know the truth comes out and you really see human nature. But what I want to pull from that, though, is to say that, you know, what the miracle is not that we take care of so many people in the emergency department and make them better. The miracle is that you realize that not everyone every day isn't in the emergency department. When you see how easy it is for people to be in accidents and to get sickness and to die. I mean, and so I'll never forget this. I was at this conference, and there was this lady who was giving a talk about how when she was in this very difficult moment of her life, she was being abused in a domestic relationship. She had different vices and issues that, you know, I won't mention, but she at one point saw God. Okay, this was what she said. She literally saw God in a vision. He was speaking to her. And to be honest, like I couldn't really get into what she was saying. I felt like I didn't quite believe how theatrical her experience was. But nevertheless, I listened to it. The conference ended. I'm driving home. I'm like, you know what, God, you've never appeared to me. You know, like where's the vision for me? I kind of felt left out, like a little jealous. You know.
Or had he, and you'd not realized it?
Well, the other thing I wanted to say was, wait, I've never been abused in a domestic relationship. I've never had all of these issues. Like I've been protected by God's grace my whole life. Like he is there, but you know, I don't want to have tragedy in my life just so that I can then see him, you know, like, oh, here's all the suffering, Pete, and we'll give you a little vision of myself to get you through it, which is consoling. But you know, I felt like it was another way that God connects with us that I should be more grateful for. And it came through that brief encounter with this lady.
Yeah, and he has our names in his book, and he knows us all by that name, and he knows us all individually, and he treats us all differently because we are different. And I think that's important too. And one of the reasons I said I didn't want to go too much into the intimacy is because what you just said about, you know, that it sounds unbelievable to other people, and we have different comfort levels about where we can go with this conversation. And I think when he touches our lives, it's very personal, and it's very much between us and him. And on some, you know, as much as I'm open to discussing the faith as we are, and as I do in public quite a lot, there are some elements of that we need to keep to ourselves and between us and God, because that's part of that intimate, loving relationship that we have with him.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. And very fair. Quick question for you. And again, I want to be cognizant of your time, and I have time, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity to speak with you, Calvin. So, tell me just on a more technical basis, what denomination of Christianity are you a part of? And when you say that you're moving towards the priesthood, are we talking about Roman Catholicism? Or are we talking about the Anglican Church? What?
Yeah.
Just
I'm an Anglican to my core, but I'm a high churchman. I do believe that ritual and tradition are important. So I'd probably describe myself as an evangelistic Catholic, in that I do believe that we are called to preach the gospel and spread the word of God, not just silo ourselves in our beautiful little churches. We are supposed to be out there with the people, helping them where we can, but also the Catholicity, the tradition from the fathers is so important, as well as, of course, the primacy of Scripture. Everything should always come back to Scripture. Yeah, no, okay. So that helps me kind of connect with you here, because as Orthodox Christians, our saga, we like this. We highlight apostolic succession. So. Christ makes an apostle, who makes a bishop, all the way down to the bishop that I get a blessing from. And there's only about 3 churches, I believe, that can claim that: Roman Catholics, Anglicans, and Orthodox Christians. Yeah. And I think to some extent that is a very important aspect, because, the Bible is a massive book, and there were many, Greek-speaking people, I dare say, that looked like Santa Claus with big beards and black cloaks, that put that book together, and that was very much it was an oral tradition. It was a council, and those initial steps made an impact on the rest of Christian history. There was only one Catholic and Apostolic Church up until 1054, until the bull of excommunication was placed on Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and then post Renaissance times and the Reformation, I think there's now like 40,000 different Protestant groups in the United States, that are connected in one way or another. But I have my biases as to why Orthodoxy is such a strong historic faith. And I know the Anglican Church also has a strong history. I think Constantine himself was announced emperor, actually, when he was in England. I think I would say that we are both Catholics, and I use that term not in the Roman Catholic sense, but in the Holy Catholic and Apostolic sense. And I think that what you said there about apostolic succession is what makes us Catholic. We are part of the universal church, whether we're Orthodox, Anglican, or Roman Catholic, and that is so important. And there's so many more things that bring us together in those 3 denominations than separates us. And I think we're getting to a place now where we're focusing more on the unity than the division, which is a great thing.
Well, it's so key, because at this point in time, I mean, the landscape is so lukewarm, it's so cold in places, and there's just not that same backdrop of spiritual infrastructure where we can be like, oh, at least we all agree on this, and now let's start debating. It's like there's so little of that anywhere, that if you just meet a person who values Christianity or spirituality, even, you feel like that's special. We don't want to lose that connection, however different the nuances might be. I will say, though, there are reasons why I'm not Roman Catholic. One of the reasons is, I'll highlight a personal experience. My dad is an eye surgeon, but he's also a priest, and he had 5 sons. And in the Orthodox Church, priests have always been able to marry, and they're extraordinary mentors, in the sense that it's difficult to have a family. I don't think you're married to have any kids. I'm married. I have 4 kids. But I'm a doctor. I'm a pretty busy guy. My wife's a lawyer. But I mean, I get great instruction from priests who have children, and they understand the realities of that. Now, again, there are also monastics in the Orthodox Church in places like Mount Athos and in Jerusalem and Sinai, etc. And they also have incredible insights. But it's sometimes you need someone who's walking in your journey contextually. What's the Anglican position on priests and marriage?
Yeah, so our priests are married too. And
Okay.
I think it's very important. I do appreciate that some people are called celibacy, but not
Sure.
everyone is. I think it's a very dangerous rule to suggest that priests should be celibate. I think the Roman Catholic Church has got that wrong. It's not scriptural. It is a relatively new tradition in the big picture, and I think the Orthodox Church and Anglican Church have a better, more holistic view on that.
Yeah, and again, and there's a place for celibacy if you wanted. You just become a monk, but you have the option. My wife actually was born and raised in Poland, and the funny thing is her father was considering the priesthood, and he decided, I want to be married instead. And so, in a certain sense, it put these two beautiful things at odds with one another, which I just don't think feels natural or good. But that does have an impact. It does have an impact. I think all of these things cascade into indirect first order and second order effects. They can have, it can have deleterious outcomes sometimes. But it's one of those things that I think really makes, Christian churches that embrace marriage and the priesthood as things that really go together as a big strength. Calvin, remind me, how much time do you have left? I don't want to keep you.
I've got till past, so we've got some time. Don't worry.
Okay, that's wonderful. So let me ask you this: how has let me be a contrarian here. What is one thing in your landscape that makes you feel like the heck with it? I don't even want to be religious anymore. Is there anything that really frustrates you about the other side? Like, is there something that just sometimes you hear, you're just like, if this is true, forget the whole thing? Anything that frustrates you?
The one thing that frustrates me the most is the one thing that's always frustrated me the most. The reason I struggled to get into religion in the first place, even though I had faith, was the organized institution. Right now, I'm a member of the Church of England, for example, and it took me understanding theology to get me past that, because of course we are all fallen, we're all flawed individuals, and any institution that's made up of fallen individuals will also have problems. But that is so difficult. It's such a big hurdle to get over. I hear from people all the time, actually, that say, I'm a Christian, I believe, but I don't go to church because I don't like the religious institution. And that's difficult, because you can't be a Christian unless you go to church. That's part of our calling. We are called to be together. Yes. And it's not an individualistic faith, unfortunately. But the Church of England, I find so difficult, because the hierarchy, I'm trying not to be too controversial, but the hierarchy are what I would call liberal progressive, and they believe in a lot of things that I don't believe in, but it's not theological. They believe in the climate crisis. They believe that this country should have voted to remain in the European Union. They believe that people shouldn't be allowed into church unless they've been vaccinated for COVID-19. They believe in so many things that I think are irrelevant to our faith, and they put that at the forefront of what they're doing. And we're so much more likely to hear them preach about these issues than we are about the gospel. And actually, we're getting to a point now where they are actively preventing people from preaching the gospel, which makes me question a lot of these people who are in leadership positions. Are they even faithful? It's not my place to question if someone is a Christian or not, but when they are actively preventing people from professing the faith, nothing concerns me more. I'm having a struggle myself personally at the moment, because I'm conservative and I believe in family values, because I believe they are fundamentally Christian values, and we are called to spread the faith, but also to have a family and go forth and multiply. And all of these are being challenged and suppressed by the institution of the church, at the same time as the church will profess that there are institutional problems, but these aren't the ones. So it will say we are institutionally racist, and I'll be like, are you sure? Do you have any evidence for that? People in the hierarchy will say, well, no, we don't have any evidence, but we are saying it. And of course, it's another liberal progressive idea that it's wokeism that's taken over the church. It's virtue signaling rather than trying to do good and preach about being good.
Yes.
And I find it so difficult to be a part of the body that is doing that. And I know that might sound hypocritical as someone who's training for the priesthood, training to be a professional within that body, but I hope, or my hope has always been, to fight from within to help as part of a wider movement. I'm not saying it's about me, but help as part of a bigger group to pull us back towards God and away from all this woke nonsense. At this point in time, I don't know if that's going to be a possibility, because I don't know if the hierarchy want me a part of that body. But some of it is out of their hands. Some of it is up to God.
Well, one of the great parts of COVID-19, honestly, was that it really called our bluff. I mean, it really made us face ourselves. What I mean by that is, in the Orthodox Church, we literally believe communion is the body and blood of Christ. There's a lot of ways of describing it. It's considered a mystery, but when you take that, it's participating in divinity. It's the Eucharist.
Yeah.
Well, there were periods of time throughout the COVID lockdown where you were literally not allowed to go to a church, and every parish had to decide what they were going to do about that announcement. Well, I'm very proud to say my father never shut down a single service.
Good man.
People were getting the lifeblood of Christ the entire time. But at the same time, though, I mean, can you imagine like someone approaching the cup of Christ and being like, you know what, I might get COVID here, and let's just hold off for a few months or maybe a few years or never again. And it's just like, so do you really think it was truly divine then? Can you just finally admit that this was more of a tea party or something, of invisible friends, and I mean, that to me, that just sort of shows that people just weren't really truly faithful about it, which is concerning. But yeah, I mean, if this is really it.
It's worse than that. So I'm not focusing on the faithful, because of course people have different levels of theology, and so I'm fine with people accepting the host and not the chalice. You don't have to receive in both forms if you don't want to, for me at least. But my issue isn't with them. My issue is with the people that said we need to close the churches, because that is wicked. I can't think of a more charitable way of saying it. It is wicked. We're denying people access to the sacraments. We are a sacramental faith.
Sure.
Priests should literally die before closing their churches. They should martyr themselves before. And I know it sounds hyperbolic and out there, but that is the calling. So I think, I don't know if it might be different where you are, but in this country, the institution actually doesn't have a right to tell you to close your churches. By canon law, only the priests and the PCC can say we're closing our churches. But the way they worded it was that you will be disciplined if you don't. And again, I find that evil. There is an evil working in the hierarchy that needs to be scourged. That's the only way I can describe what's happening.
Sure. Well, and what also is funny about it, again, I'm an emergency medicine doctor, so I think I can speak to this firsthand. I mean, in 2 years of taking care of patients in the emergency department, I think I've had 2 below the age of 30 that needed to come in for some antibiotics and oxygen. Otherwise, they went home. I'm not saying there aren't rare cases, but when you're trying to make an ethical decision, a decision for policy, a decision for public health, you just can't. There needs to be some utilitarian understanding of why we're going to suffer the collateral damage of these lockdowns, so that, well, anyway, I don't want to discount the suffering that occurred. It's just to say, though, that people have been dealing with viruses and illness for millions of years, and we've overcome them, and we can't hide from it. The collateral damage was massive, and as you mentioned, mental health. I mean, you were much more likely to die of suicide as a teenage girl through COVID than you were of COVID itself. So what do you do with that? And, again, regardless of anyone's statistic, I can say being at bedside in emergency departments, and of course, by the way, I never got a day off for being sick. They always told me to go to work no matter what anyway, so there was no mercy there, as everyone gave us the slow clap of being frontline, whatever. But the point, though, is that it was, it's crazy to me, to the idea that we would compromise our most important values and at the expense of something that turned out not to be so atypical to human history, so bad.
Well, even if it was this terrible killer virus that we thought it might have been at one point, it's not the church's job to make public health decisions. It's the job of the church. Even if these people don't believe that we are a sacramental faith, it's the job of the church to step in to support people in their spiritual well-being. So even there, to close the churches and turn people away was the greatest evil of our generation. I don't know how. Of course, everything is forgivable, but I don't know how we move past this. I don't know how we regain trust in the public as a church after saying we don't want you.
Just a question. This might be me as an American speaking, but in America, if you don't like your religion or your Christian faith, you just start a new one. So, but obviously I come from an historic faith and we don't like schism. We don't like that perspective. But I would just like to ask you, are there a lot of sects or divisions within the Anglican Church that sort of say, hey, there's the mainstream thing, but here's the pure, unadulterated Anglican group that you can join today? Like, is that exist, or is that not like?
Yes, it is a thing. It's much bigger in the US. Obviously, ACNA, which is going to take over from the Episcopal Church soon, I think, is sound Orthodox Anglicanism. Over here, we don't really have as big a movement. We still have continuing Anglicanism, or this part of the GAFCON movement. It is present over here, but not in the same way as it is in the States. Unfortunately, I wish it was. Maybe that's something that needs help and growth.
Well, I'll tell you this, though. I mean, to some extent, that division in that pursuit of purity sometimes can be very detrimental, as people don't have to work out their differences and don't have to restore back to what is supposed to be guarded or preserved. So I do think that in the United States, I mean, a lot of people consider America a very religious country, but it's also a very secular country, and part of that is that there's just so many groups that really don't agree on many things, and they don't have an incentive to. If you disagree, start a 501c3 nonprofit organization, grab a few families, and build a barn. But you lose out with that sometimes. But at the same time, I guess in some ways it's nice to know where your boundaries are and that people within that boundary are like-minded.
I think the dilemma is, can you reform something from within? Yeah. And if so, then you must. If you can't, then you must leave that organization if it's gone down a wicked path, and try to cling to orthodoxy and the apostolic succession and all of the things that are important in our faith. It's a very big dilemma, and I think it's quite good that in America you can just get a few families together and start a church. I think that's great, as long as you remain faithful and a part of the universal church in the broader sense. Then that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. I'd have to unpack that a little bit more if there was time. Question for you, given what you're going through as an Anglican, why not become Roman Catholic? I mean, why not become Lutheran? There's got to be other Christian groups. I'm just curious, what keeps you wanting to fight from within? Is it that the Anglican Church has sort of the most agreeable of something in terms of overall portfolio of beliefs that you like and adhere to, or what keeps you from jumping boat into something else that's out there? It sounds reasonable. Why hasn't that happened yet?
Well, I think that I think that Anglicanism is the universal church in this realm. I think that as far as apostolic succession, as far as the Catholicity, the tradition is important, that's all been maintained through the Anglican Church in England. The primacy of Scripture is a good example. I think the Reformation was important because Rome had lost its way. It had become too political. Sure. It was giving primacy to many things that weren't scriptural, and it's gone down some paths that I don't think are true to the faith. And I don't mean to be critical, because I think it's a very good thing for a lot of people. But orthodoxy is important to me, and whether that's Anglicanism or Eastern Orthodox. But in this land, it happens to be Anglicanism.
Yeah. No, it's the stakes are great, right? I mean, depending on who you talk to, what results, if you're part of the right faith, the wrong faith, if in spirit you have the right set of beliefs, if in practice you have the right set of actions, I just hope that God, to some extent, is the ultimate judge, which He is, of course, and can kind of help us through it. There's so many ways to fail. You get to Christianity, you get to a certain group within Christianity, then there's all about actually doing what you're supposed to be doing and believing what you're supposed to believe. And you just hope that the end calculation is multifactorial and there's some mercy involved with it, because I'm sure we all have our shortcomings.
As much as I don't believe in things like papal infallibility, which would stop me from ever joining the Roman Catholic Church, I think
agreed.
God finds a way to work through these things. So as much as the Roman Catholic Church might have lost its way, God will still be working through it, and that's the important thing to remember.
Sure. So what's new with you? What are you working on right now in terms of your spiritual journey? What's next?
So I'm working on an Easter special, very similar to the Christmas special that I produced. I fought to get that to happen. It's going ahead, so I'm very pleased with that. And after that, I have no idea. I've got 2 months left as we record this in seminary. At the moment, the hierarchy, it doesn't look like they want me as part of the church. So I don't know where I'll be going or what I'll be doing. I still very much feel called to ministry. So I don't know. I honestly don't know what my future holds for me. What I'm trying to do is pray, discern, and keep my ears open and try and find the door that God is opening for me. Because as He closes the door, as that door is closed, He always opens another. I don't know where I am right now. I'm a little bit lost, to be honest with you. But as I look back in a couple of years, it will all, I'm sure, make sense.
Yeah. You have a calling, but your church doesn't want you to fill it.
Yeah, that will be accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny here because I think that we're all sort of walking our path through this in our own way. Just curious, on a technical basis, are you able to get married once you become a priest in the Anglican Church? Okay, yeah, that's funny. In the Orthodox Church, it's for whatever reason they want you to get married before you become a priest, and then you can take that step. Of course, there are celibate priests, but for whatever reason, that seems to be the rule of the game there in that regard. But okay, I understand the flow of what you're talking about. Have you ever been to a monastery?
Well, yeah. There's a couple in the UK that I've visited. There's actually a monastic community that is part of a seminary that I went to visit and spend some time at up in the Midlands, which is quite nice. I like the idea of centering your life around prayer. In fact, that's why I chose this seminary, because this is not a monastic community, but this is so we start our day with morning prayer and we end our day with evening prayer, and everything else has to fit around that, including your essays, your exams, all of your academic work, everything. It's prayer comes first, everything else comes second, and it's difficult. It's always a challenge, but I think it's an important one to have.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of times at monasteries. Orthodoxy, the Greek Orthodox Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church has a very strong tradition in the monastic orders. There's a specific area in Greece called Mount Athos. It's a group of about 23 monasteries of different ethnic backgrounds. Some of them are Russian, some of them are Greek, but it's actually I think the longest self-autonomous governing surviving technical country, and a UNESCO site too, in the world. Right. And I've been there as a teenager, and I actually ended up writing a book about Mount Athos and its diet, because in fact, people live a very long time there without any Western intervention. And one of the things that they do is they fast, oftentimes with Christ, to the 9th hour when He died. So He doesn't eat, they don't eat. And what they discovered was intermittent fasting. And what I try to highlight is sort of the wisdom of these traditional practices in regards to one of the more difficult parts of being Orthodox Christian, which is fasting. Since I was 7, we're basically vegans half the year. Nothing wrong with meat, nothing wrong with dairy, but for whatever reason, the church had this wisdom. And I have to tell you, the return on investment for that practice is massive. I wrote a book on the concept. And one of the things I'm trying to do actually is, maybe one of the reasons I'm reaching out to you, is I'm trying to see if I can get a group of spiritually minded people to travel there and perhaps do a documentary on this idea. And this is just planting a seed. It's just a brainstorm, but basically it's a beautiful place, first and foremost. It feels mysterious. It's like Narnia. It's like Lord of the Rings. I mean, literally. And these people are dealing with the most direct battles, spiritual ones. And at the same time, there's this beautiful lifestyle surrounding them that keep their health going, that allow them to be isolated and at the same time be very hospitable. And so anyway, there's some really, really wonderful things to be found and discovered in these monasteries, specifically at Mount Athos. Some argue it's a center, it's sort of a center of gravity for spirituality, when people say, hey, where do we go to feel that refreshment? And that's the place they describe. But yeah, I also know from my brief time of being in England that there were many beautiful churches there. I always appreciated when I would see a Byzantine icon of St. George in many of them. And it was the acoustics of those cathedrals were really something to enjoy. I think I was in Canterbury and had I just happened to listen to a choir that was singing there. It was absolutely phenomenal. Hey, any last questions or comments, Calvin, that I can summarize, or we can chat about before the end?
Well, that mount sounds wonderful, and I'd love to visit at some point. It sounds great. As for fasting, I used to do a very papist fast actually over Lent, as in the old tradition. So I'd have no food throughout the day at all until nightfall, so usually around 6 p.m. Over Lent, and have one meal per day, and make it a light meal too, not overindulge, not Ramadan style or anything. But I just drink water all day, and
Yes.
at first, I actually found it quite easy and quite spiritually enlightening. But then eventually, I reached a point where I found it very, very difficult, and I found it quite painful. So that told me that actually, for a while, I need to not do that and focus on other things. So this year for Lent, I've given up Twitter, and I took some time off of different commitments as well. But I think there's definitely different times in our lives for different things. But fasting is absolutely very, very spiritually enlightening and very important. And I think more people should focus on fasting.
Yeah, it's a massive part of being Orthodox, actually, and it really is life-changing. I bring up in this book that the largest nervous system in our body is not the brain; it's actually the enteric nervous system, which is our digestion. And I see no coincidence that God gives us the highest Eucharist, that the Eucharist is the highest sacrament. Like communion is a food, you know, and meanwhile there's this system in the intestine that is more complex than our brain that allows us to participate with that. And then when people like to make change, you know, they start with their diet usually. Oh, I'm going to get my life in order. I'm going to start with my diet. Why is that? And maybe it's because the second brain or the center of our gravity is actually our gut, which is strange to consider, but then fasting then becomes sort of this major biohack for, well, and spiritual hack. And no coincidence that many faiths around the world employ that. And Orthodoxy really does make use of that. And for short periods of time. I mean, it's scattered throughout the year. It's not all year long.
But it's something we know inherently. We know that, you know, a woman, if that wants to attract a guy, the best way to his heart is through a good meal. We know these things. It makes sense to us practically, but maybe we don't know the science behind it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the uncovering. That's, you know, I like to say this, you know, science is ask the question of how, and religion and spirituality ask the question of why. And oftentimes we confuse these questions and these topics, and we wonder why we're not, you know, we're just having parallel discussions. And so I think what's cool is oftentimes when we find that intersection where science is finally seen as a complement and supplement to the greatest science, which is that of the church. And so, you know, we've been on this earth for a very long time as a human species and surviving very well. With and without modern science. And honestly, I feel sometimes that this modern experiment in you know, this 200-year experiment in the context of millions of years is such a brief one. And who knows, maybe the peak of civilization was when God came in flesh 2,000 years ago. Things looked a lot more beautiful then. You know, Rome seemed beautiful. You know, people I'm sure lived good lives. I'm just hypothesizing here, but you know, I think it's just our egos that say that we're now the pinnacle of human civilization. I don't know. It's somewhat concerning sometimes too.
Absolutely. I think we always think that we're better now than we have been in the past. That's a great mistake. I think, to me, on what you just touched on, our religion tells us that there is a universal truth, and that truth is God. That truth is Christ. Science is about exploring the universal truths around us. So physics and chemistry, it's all about, it's looking towards that truth. It's a search for God. And the mistake we've made post-enlightenment is thinking that science is the faith. We've replaced God with knowledge, and that's a mistake, because knowledge is supposed to lead us toward God, as is everything. I think that pretty much summarizes to me where we're at. But as for civilization, I think that the peak of civilization was actually probably the Renaissance period, where the focus was on, you know, noblesse oblige. It was on good. If you were rich and powerful, you were a patron of the arts, and you made sure that you gave back to society, and society was a thing, community was a thing, and all of the art produced from that period of time is probably, I would say, arguably the best art that has ever been produced. And that is because it's all the most beautiful, because it's all focused on God rather than ourselves. And ever since that period, pretty much all of contemporary art is about the self, and it's about, we have to put forward a message, we have to put forward this and that. We've forgotten what the truth is, the way, the truth. is Christ, and we've forgotten that.
Hey, Calvin, I'll let us end on that topic or that note. I thought that was very well said. I'm so grateful for your time today and to connect with you. Like I said, I think when I came across your work, I saw an ally and someone who, if anything that I've experienced often in this path, can be quite alone sometimes. Just consider me your brother from the USA, your Greek Orthodox brother. But I hope you're well. I hope you stay healthy. And I hope that these things unfold in the right direction for you, going forward. Once again, thank you so much for letting me interview you. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's been a very fascinating conversation. I appreciate you reaching out. So God bless.
Thank you, Calvin.